Okay, all right. So, good noon, everybody, and welcome today to our guest speaker, Emilie Tran, who's going to be giving her talk on China's role in social power in the Middle East and North Africa. So, Emilie is currently an assistant professor at Hong Kong Metropolitan University. She's educated in political science, yes, at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, the Graduate School of Social Sciences in Paris. She's lived in Hong Kong and Macau for many years in different academic functions, and also as an elected representative of the French expat community, which has many representative organizations in France and so on. And she's done, so recently she's done a lot of research on China's different aspects of Chinese soft power, particularly looking at the Mediterranean, where she's recently edited a book, and she's also previously worked on overseas Chinese communities and networks and other topics. So without any further ado, let's welcome Emilie Tran.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you, and I want to thank Professor David Palmer for the kind invitation, and also Dr. Yana Pak for all the very smooth and excellent organization, the logistics, going down there to pick me up. So those of you who are hiking up here, it's a kind of physical exercise before you get some food for thoughts. That was really, but it's a nice walk. It's a very beautiful place, and it's a part of Hong Kong that I didn't know. So thank you for inviting me here. So I know that I have 50 minutes and I have 44 slides to share with you. And I try to make this enjoyable and a kind of conversation-like. So as you can see, the title is China's Role and Social Power in the Middle East and North Africa. And let us start with, for those of you who may not be very familiar, what we call the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA. So I'm going to say MENA from now on. Basically, it's those 21 countries that you see there. Okay. Am I speaking loud enough? I don't know, maybe if some people on the Zoom say that I need to speak louder, I'll do my best. So what I'm going to do today is, rather than explaining to you the concepts and the theory and the literature, basically take you with me through a long journey that I conducted, and it was sharing my research journey in the times of COVID-19. So how it all started and how I arrived where I am today facing you. So, in every story, you do have a beginning, and what I call the genesis. Basically, it was an initiative. Thank you. It was an initiative of colleagues of mine in France, Saïd Belgidoum and Farida Souya, and they are both speak Arabic, and they study the Maghreb, and the more they study the Maghreb, the more they realize that in the Maghreb there is a new stakeholder, a newcomer, and that is China. So they organized this special issue in a French academic journal called Confluence Méditerranée, and somehow they invited me to contribute a piece. So I wrote a piece on Marseille and how the port in the south of France called Marseille has become basically very much invested by the Chinese that wanted to take part of the port in order to be a flagship for one of their factories, and then to flood the rest of Europe with their car products. And in this special issue, you can see that there is another scholar here called Yahya Zubir, and Yahya, basically this is how we got to know each other. So this special issue and this particular piece of mine was really to study how the city of Marseille, that was very much open to the influence of Africa, North Africa, and to some extent the Middle East, came to know a new comer, that is China. And then from this special issue, I wanted to learn more about the Africa. as whole, because this was not really my area of study. And so I started to look into this area. And then I published with Yahya Zubir in this handbook, Routledge Handbook on the Modern Maghreb. We published a chapter about the Maghreb and Europe, the United States, Russia, the JCC, so basically the Gulf countries, and Turkey. And it was a very nice way for me to enter into the MENA region and to look at all the stakeholders in this greater Middle East and also greater Maghreb, and to look at the powers at play. So it was an interesting piece because we can see that's the findings of this chapter, that basically in those regions where you have the former colonial powers and a strong presence and influence of the United States, all these countries basically are thinking about realigning their pro-Western alliances and to consolidate other alliances, including with countries such as Turkey. Naturally, we spoke about Russia, we spoke about the Gulf countries. So, and also we speak about the coming of China in these countries. So this is a phenomenon that has taken some time. It happened over the past 10 years, but it's a major phenomenon. And to some extent, it was understudied or not very looked at by people studying China, because people studying China, look at China, US, possibly sometimes China, Europe. But what was happening in the Middle East was a little bit overlooked. So that was our contribution in this. And then basically came 2020 and COVID. So we all know what happened. All of a sudden, you know, we are all doing our respective jobs and activities. And all of a sudden, the work came to a standstill. We have this pandemic. I think those emojis shows basically how I felt, but how everyone, I believe, on Zoom and here felt, you know, what is happening? My God, we cannot travel anymore. Borders that did not exist now exist again. So basically it was harsh time for us. And what could we do in those times? Basically, I looked a lot at the news, and looking at the news, I was attracted by some of these news headlines, you know, that the EU is not looking after Italy, which is an EU founding member state. Italy had a major cases of epidemic, and basically didn't have enough respiratory machine, did not have enough surgical mask, etc. So all the headlines where Italy is left alone, everybody is going back to its national mindset and no more European type of collective mindset. And another set of news that came after this, very surprisingly, is how China stepped in Europe in order to give a helping hand to Italy when Italy was abandoned by the other Europeans. So I found, wow, these news are quite amazing, quite interesting as well. And I wanted to know more about this. And then the more I digged, the more I found news about this new phrase, China's Health Silk Road. And also, so wondering, what is this thing? We know about the Belt and Road Initiative, but what is this Health Silk Road? And we also know this word, that is the narrative. And there was basically a huge battle of narrative going on between China, the US, and China and Europe. So I really wanted to learn more about this. So basically, you are in a time of pandemic where everything is stopped, and then you think, how can I do my research? What can I do more? And basically, I wanted to study how we can shift from epidemic diplomacy or health diplomacy to this so-called battle of narrative. So that was my thinking back in 2020. And of course, as all researchers, when we have some ideas, we start to write some easy conference papers, we put down our ideas. And in those years of 2020, 2021, you know, we couldn't travel, especially those of us based in Hong Kong. So we had webinars. So people on Zoom, hello. It's very common for you now, for all of us to have Zoom webinars. But back then in 2020, it was something I remember quite new to me. So I did a few of those webinars, one for the Brookings Institution to talk about China's role precisely in the MENA in the COVID era. Talking about economic relations of China with North Africa before and after COVID. And I did another one for the Doha Forum as well on Chinese foreign policy. So I was a bit testing my, ideas, hypotheses in those kind of global venues because we couldn't go to conferences. So basically it was very nice discussion and very nice engagement with other scholars in those times. And out of this conversation, brainstorming, webinars, we produced a set of papers. So from now on, I'm going to take you through different set of papers and how these papers findings take me to the next step of findings. So basically, all these papers were looking into this core topic, that is China's public diplomacy in the COVID-19 era. And so I will just go through these papers. And that's really me, I worked on that computer. So I couldn't find the emoji with the pink color, but that's really me like that. Yes. So summary of findings. So basically, there are 4 big areas where I think that the findings are quite interesting that I'm going to share with you today. So first of all, what is really health diplomacy for China? Is it something new or something not that new, but not that very well known? And I wanted to look into the reactions of the MENA countries to this China's health diplomacy, the reactions from European countries, and also what we call really this battle of narratives. So that was really my take. So let us start first with China's health diplomacy. And that's a book. So specifically on China's health diplomacy, I published with Yahya one journal article that you can see here. So China's health Silk Road in the Middle East and North Africa. While I'm aging, I can't really see the screen, so I have to look at here. So I look at the camera there. So sorry if I don't look at you. And then the book chapter in this Routledge Companion on China and the Middle East and North Africa. So that's a very good, actually, handbook for students and graduates and scholars. If you want to look into everything about China and the MENA, this is really a very good reference. So what did we discover? We discovered through our research that China's global health policies basically has been very present and very deep. And we can say that even before our contemporary times, knowledge of medical cures were transmitted from China, from India through the Silk Road. And that's true, they were transmitting all this knowledge alongside with trade and products. They were, as we know, transmitting knowledge, including indeed knowledge on health and knowledge on cure, on herbal cures in those times. So in the contemporary times, so after the foundation of the PRC, we know that China has sent doctors, hundreds of doctors, to all those that we call now global South countries, but developing countries in those times. So China in those years, as we all know, was not a very wealthy country and not developed itself, but it took very much pride to send doctors to places. One of the most well-known places that had Chinese doctors is indeed, for example, Algeria, so in North Africa. And Yahya, my co-author, was actually, has in his family examples of babies being born with the assistance of Chinese midwives and doctors. So, China has established some kind already of soft power in there. China was well known for doing this, but maybe it was a little bit overlooked by the rest of the world and the West in particular. So in the 1980s, this South-South cooperation became even more significant, and China continued to develop its overseas medical assistance to the global South. by continuing to send and to dispatch medical teams, and also to dispatch medical units in different years. So what I didn't put there is that China suffered from SARS in 2003. And then the Middle East got another version of SARS that we call MERS in the mid-2010s, and it was transmitted by camels. And it was completely overlooked by the Western world because it was just constrained within a region, and we don't have camels in the rest of the world. So, you know, we don't get a chance to get MERS. And China was the only country to step in and to work hand in hand with the Middle East to try to develop a cure against MERS. So also for Africa, China was very prominent to develop cures with certain African countries and also medical teams. So China has been doing this, but it was not just very well publicized and not well known, therefore, in the rest of the world. So that was before COVID-19. So this is to say that the Health Silk Road did not just come like this because of the pandemic. The pandemic helped China to step up its narrative, to step up its propaganda or its publicity, and certainly to coin this phrase that is the Health Silk Road. So during the COVID-19, indeed, the Chinese scholars spoke of epidemic diplomacy because China was the epicenter. And when China was out of COVID, the COVID moved to the Middle East, indeed, before reaching Europe. So, but we didn't know about that. You know, we just look at Europe and the United States. So as the epicenter moved, China could use its own experience and then try to help the Middle East countries and later on Europe countries such as Italy. So for Xi Jinping, it was more than just epidemic diplomacy because the idea was to embed this health diplomacy into the Silk Road, hence the word Health Silk Road embedded in the BRI. And the Health Silk Road was also part of, was also another component that is the digital Silk Road, and through the health and digital Silk Road, China could further propagate its traditional Chinese medicine, and this is one of the core foreign policy of China. So under what is known as public and cultural diplomacy. So there were some precedents, and then the COVID-19 came, and the COVID-19 gave China the center stage to deploy what existed before. First of all, the BRI, and secondly, its health public diplomacy dating back to the foundation of the PRC. So we also looked at why China wants to do that. And we looked at the official discourses, and we saw that China's health diplomacy is basically justified through a kind of moral imperative for China. So you know that China nowadays is looking at the world and trying to build an entire discourse on the world outlook. So now China believes that there is this moral imperative to engage into public health and global public health. So that has been said before in those two studies by Drew Thompson and Neil Duggan. So with this, we come back. So we took a step back, and now we come back to 2020. And what do we see in 2020 is that basically China is using all these logistical means, including air freight, but also all these railroads that China has been building from China, going through Central Asia, reaching Europe. During the time of the pandemics, these trains continue to function, and they were shipping actually medical goods and products throughout these countries and also to reach Europe. So this Health Silk Road was indeed very much put in place, and China could, it was basically the first opportunity for China to deploy and to advertise everything it has been doing in terms of health diplomacy. But again, on this picture, we have previous studies that, and that is what I said to you about the MERS, is that basically China had this forum on health with the Middle East and with African countries. And this forum were embedded in the FOCAC, so that is the summit between China and African countries. So it has already been there, but it is true that it has never reached European countries, so possibly having been overlooked. We also see here another pictures of the deployment of the Chinese medical staff in different African countries. So, by the mid-2010s, Chinese doctors, Chinese nurses, medical units, they were something in the landscape and in the mindset of the people in the Middle East and Africa. So when China deployed then its health Silk Road in the time of pandemic, it was just another program. It was not just new. So that explains why the perceptions were very different between Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, because the other countries in the MENA, they had already this experience, while for Europeans, all of a sudden they saw China as a developing country, big country, and all of a sudden China coming to their rescue. So this is all the pictures of the China Arab State Health Cooperation Forum. That was 2019, before the time of the COVID. So China and other scholars have shown this, that the BRI, China have been having this very enriching bilateral and multilateral cooperation that was indeed helping to build China's agenda, certainly, and also to build China's social power. And I will come back to this soon. So we have seen the role of China already as a public health, provider, public health collaborator with these countries. And now China is setting up the agenda, having those summits, setting up this cooperation in institutional manner. So it's just not a one-off assistance. And of course, we have talked a lot about how China is helping the other countries in the time of hardship. But to set up this battle of narrative, again, let us take a step back. And when China was first suffering from COVID-19, from the coronavirus, the entire world came to the rescue of China. And that is true. So let us not forget that. And even so, those are excerpts, infographics from the Global Times. And even the Global Times now look at how much the international community, up to 170 countries, were coming to the support of China. So there was a lot of solidarity of the rest of the world towards China when China was in need. So that was the first trimester of 2020. And then we see that China is paying back. So that is part of this, media discourse, official discourse. After receiving all this aid, now that the rest of the world is in need, China is trying to pay back, because the epicenter of the pandemic has moved to the rest of the world. And we have seen messages from diplomatic posts and missions of China to publicize, to talk about this help that the Chinese government, Chinese people, corporations are providing. And at times, it is true that these stories put forward by the foreign diplomatic missions were rather aggressive. And this is where we talked about the Wolf Warrior diplomacy. And I will show you another piece that I worked on about exactly this topic. So you have some goodwill, certainly from both sides, the world and China, helping each other and collaborating in order to get out of the crisis at a moment where there was no cure. And at the same time, you have this emerging that are picking stories that are rather aggressive from the Chinese side. So that's how the battle of narrative essentially started. So what we try to say in this chapter is basically that against this background that I just very briefly brushed to you, basically we found that China's approach to a South-South cooperation has indeed gained in a profile thanks to the COVID-19, because China could assert furthermore everything it has been doing so far, following SARS, following the MERS, following epidemic crisis as well in sub-Saharan Africa. And basically, China is also setting up alternative international structures outside of the WHO, the World Health Organization forum, and to set up alternative forum where China is leading the conversation, such as the China-Arab State, MENA Forum on Public Health. So this is one of our findings. So in this other article that I showed you previously, basically we went beyond the China's health diplomacy and the South-South cooperation, and we moved the discussion a bit beyond into the world context, into the global context, and we try to understand why in this contested world order, China's work and China's public health diplomacy has not been well received by the Western countries and states. So, so this article goes further into comparing the reception and the reactions of MENA states and people, and comparing that with the reaction and perceptions of the European states and people. So this is what we did in this article, and we basically said that this COVID-19 health diplomacy of China come into a context that is basically very specific, because we have had the trade war between China and the US. And in this trade war, we already had a lot of battle on the narrative. So it is certainly this context that explains the milder reaction from the Europe and MENA. So moving this to the reaction now. So now I have explained to you the health diplomacy of China. Now we are looking at another set of findings that is really the reaction. So for these reactions, so before I go to the reactions, we need to again take a step back. And in this step back, I'd like to share with you a special issue that I co-edited with Yahya, and then that has led to this book. Basically, we looked at China in the Mediterranean. So China and the Mediterranean, so already we had the first special issue that was China and the Mediterranean in French. But in this other special issue, we go further. So you can see all the countries in a lighter blue color that we talked about. It's very interesting to look at this because it mixes global South and European developed countries. And all these are very close to one another, and one is actually the former colonial power of the other. So that's very interesting to look. So it is already a region with very complex geostrategic positions and relationship. And on top of these very complex layers, we have now China adding up. And in the Mediterranean, China can reach all to Europe and all to Africa and the Middle East. So it is a very core strategic region for China, and this is why we thought it was worth doing this special issue and therefore book. So in this work, what did we look at? Basically, we explored the increasing presence of China in the Mediterranean, but contrary to Confluence Méditerranée, we wanted to have a theoretical and conceptual framework to look at this. Otherwise, because it goes anywhere and in many places. So we wanted really to adopt the lens of role theory and the concept of trust in international relations to look at how, so first of all, through role theory, what is the role that China assigned to herself, and what are the roles that other countries assign to China, because Europeans and MENA countries look at China with very different role expectations. And we also combine this role theory with the concept of trust, because role theory is very nice, but if you don't have trust, basically you don't have any forms of relationships. So we brought back, this dying concept of trust in IR, with the Cold War. We don't talk about trust anymore. So we wanted to revive this concept and to look at this. And we found that basically there is already a huge contrast within the Mediterranean region between the northern shore of the Mediterranean, so basically all those European countries, and what we call the southern shore with the Europe, the Maghreb, and also North Africa. So, and we looked at through, so you can see the table of content there. We look at how China is gaining trust and what is the role of China in those countries. We look through the infrastructure policy of China. We look also how China look into this region through the Belt and Road initiatives. I myself looked into China-France, what I call competition, and I will come back to this. And we looked at China's relation with the Spain, and especially through a case study of the 5G networks. And also we wanted to have a tripartite review of China, North Africa, and EU relations. So let us now stop on this concept of role theory, and I'm conscious of the time. So role theory and foreign policy analysis, basically role theory, we relied on this book from Harnish and others. And basically it is the idea that states and decision makers think of themselves with a certain role, and we have defined 17 roles in the case of China. And these roles are perceived by others, so they are said by the state themselves, and they are also perceived by others, and whether what the state portray and the perception of others in terms of role do meet or not. So we talked about role expectation, and we tried to apply this role theory to China in the Mediterranean, and we talk about specifically role performance, so how China performs its role as an infrastructure provider, developer, collaborator, etc. So that is a role conception from China. Alter casting is another concept that we use, that is when we project onto others certain roles. And that is very much on the EU side. That is to alter cast on China a certain role, to assign China to a certain role. And then the importance of understanding identity and the expression of identity from all these stakeholders. So we did all these issues, actually articles and chapters, they dealt with qualitative analysis to look into those national context case studies. And in this particular piece of mine, looking at China-France relations, so I applied also again role theory, so that is how France views China, and how China views France. And you may know that actually this is one of the second longest diplomatic relationship from a European country with the PRC. So it was the second European country to recognize the PRC. So it's a very long relationship. It's the relationship that is very productive, fruitful, with lots of collaboration and exchange. But at the same time, there is a breach in the trust. So much so that, because France under Macron has been looking at China along with the other EU states as also a rival and a competitor, strategic competitor. So there are different roles now, and there are different levels of trust. And that's why I talked about the concept of co-petition. That is really, you have a lot of competition in terms of trade, in terms of technology, innovation, science, but you also have a lot of collaboration, cooperation going on. And these two actually happen at the same time. So it's not just black and white, In some years we have more collaboration, in some years we have more of distrust, but actually it all happens at the same time, and it makes this situation very complex. So we have, and I discussed also how to go beyond this distrust issue, and what are the economic and political concerns in this complex relationship. So this is because I wanted to take a step back from you to say what we have been doing first, in order to now look at what we were doing for the MENA. So we basically because we couldn't travel. So we did desktop research, and we dug into all the medias of the MENA states, and Yahya speaks and reads Arabic. So it was very nice to have this collaboration between me with Chinese language and Yahya with Arabic language. And looking at all these major MENA countries and also European countries media in Arabic, English, and French. Basically, we looked at how it was received in the MENA, and we saw that in all these MENA states, China's have diplomacy helping the countries to fight COVID-19 was overly positive. So, and it was not just the media, because we also looked at social media and what people were saying on social media, because media, you may say in those countries, they are rather government organized media. So we also looked at social media, and on social media, when you look at social media, for example, in Saudi Arabia, the women in Saudi Arabia, they look at Chinese women and it's like their dream, because they are liberated, they are entrepreneurs, they can be successful, while in Saudi Arabia, they just got the permission to drive a car if they're accompanied by a man. So you have this kind of cultural gap, and that makes China looks very good, very developed, very advanced in those countries. So you have these findings. So we speak about China's soft power in the MENA, starting from the 1950s, and hence with the COVID-19, at a time where Western Europe and the United States are basically looking less at this region, because they have their own domestic issues, because they don't have that much funding anymore to continue to support. So China steps into this gap. But we also say that these countries have their own agency. Certainly, they are not just, objects of the other's goodwill or geostrategic concerns. These countries have chosen to collaborate with China when there is need and when it's deemed pertinent, and to continue to have their relationship with the United States and with the EU. So it is just China becoming a newcomer, and China is a newcomer at a time where the Western soft power is decreasing, and China has been doing some programs before the COVID-19. So, but in all this, we have, so I mentioned the phrase battle of narratives, and there was indeed in all this rosy picture and geostrategic situation that I described to you, we have this thing that keep coming back. It is indeed the battle of narrative that started around the vaccines, So it was the vaccines race, if you remember, and which country would produce the first vaccines. China went for its own path of vaccine production, and that was the traditional way, and not mRNA pathway. So there was this vaccine narrative, and China in global times, especially, and other Chinese media accusing, the West to produce vaccines, but not to share these vaccines with the world in need. So to keep first the vaccines for their own people. So China was pinpointing to those Western countries, saying, you see, you keep having all these words, all these values, but in times of need, basically, we can see you here. And that is why China went a lot in the media saying that we are all weather friends with these MENA states. In times of need, we produce vaccines and we share these vaccines with the MENA countries. Of course, when we look closer, it is true that China established a vaccine production unit in the Middle East. It is true that also China had the human trial of its vaccine also in the Middle East, on the understanding that when the vaccine will be ready, the Middle Eastern people could benefit from the Chinese medicine. So you have this competition, these narratives on the vaccines. And now, so we have the reception and the perception of MENA states. And now what about Europe? So basically, Europe became the epicenter of this pandemic, and Europe chose to close down at first, and adopted a very protective policy towards the rest of the world, but at the same time accepting China's mask diplomacy, because China was basically, in those months, I don't know whether you were aware, we could not find any face mask in Europe. And already in late 2019, a lot of Chinese overseas living in Europe, they went to pharmacies, to drugstores to buy face masks, to ship them back to their families and friends to China, because China was going through the epidemic and did not have enough face masks. So that there was this shortage of face masks, and this method basically pinpointed to the Chinese. So you have this discrimination trend appearing in Europe, if you remember, and also in the US. So basically anyone looking Asian would be pinpointed as associated with China, as bringing the COVID-19 virus into Europe, into the United States. You have Chinese businesses and restaurants being destroyed, painted. So it was rather, and overseas Chinese were really attacked, some of them on the streets for just being Asian. So that was really tough times. So that was really the reactions there. And at the same time, so we have at the, and I will go into different levels. At the political level, so you have, first of all, Europe saying thank you to China, but when China's narrative through the Wolf Warrior aggressive messaging became too aggressive, they enter in this battle competition of narratives and stories. The COVID-19 came in a context that was already very heavy, because China, Europe, so in 2018, EU deemed China as a competitor and rival. And within this, you have this comprehensive agreement on investment that was basically many years of discussion and negotiation that was put to a halt over the Uyghur question at that moment. So a lot of EU members of parliament were very active in bringing at the forefront the Uyghur question, and that halted this agreement. We have the case of Hong Kong. So we had the protest and then the national security law in June 2020. And then Hong Kong became a big affair in EU-China relations. And it was also at the time where European Union and also countries of the Pacific were taking measures against China's advancements and influence in the Pacific. So this COVID-19 come at a time where geostrategically the situation was very tense already and very complex. And within this context, actually, I produced an article for the Journal of Contemporary China that was to look at Chinese public diplomacy, especially Twitter diplomacy, and how China was setting up the agenda in France-China relations. So this is where the concept of soft power comes in. And this concept of soft power comes from Peter Van Ham. So he wrote this book on social power in international relations. So basically, social power is different. So we know the concept of hard power. We know the concept of soft power. And social power is actually something in between, because it has this capacity. So soft power is through cultural influences, is something to attract people to your culture, language, and to your values. Eventually, it's all about world outlook and values. So, but social power is soft power plus the capacity to set the agenda, the capacity for you to decide what is to be discussed at the table, in the meeting, etc. So it is one of these three phases of power that Professor Stephen Lux talked about. And so in this China-France relation paper, I looked at how China exercised its soft power. So basically, it is China that defines the bilateral relations between France and China by saying, this is a topic that I want about. And how I'm going to bring about this topic, I have a Wolf Warrior ambassador that Mr. Lushaye said that himself about him. He was very proud to say that. And as an ambassador, very fluent in French. He went to all media and also very active on social media to talk about China's high diplomacy, but everything else about China. So basically, one person was able to define the outlook of an entire bilateral relationship. So this is how we define social power. So that is the capacity to set up the agenda and to organize everything that will follow according to its ideas. So that was at the political level. At the civil society level, we have some studies that appeared as well in the same time. That was, and all these studies from scholars and also from think tanks, they were narrating about the same set of ideas, that China was a threat. China is becoming too aggressive. China is using the COVID-19 pandemic to, exert all its influence in the Middle East and Africa, and also to come to Europe. So we have all these studies that basically align on the same discourse on the China threat. And at the popular level, so we have, of course, surveys, major surveys, such as the one by the Pew Center, looking at the unfavorable views of China. And it is true that in 2020, 2021, China reached a historic low in terms of perceptions in the rest of the world. And in this context, I co-produced with my colleague Yuqin Zheng another article on how at the society level this concept of trust that we studied already before at the national bilateral level was applied. And we discovered how the Chinese living in Europe were basically hostages of this entire bigger geostrategic picture that they could not really grasp, but they could actually suffer in their daily lives, and how China was reaching towards not only the national countries, but also to its overseas population, because one of my other area of studies, as Professor Palmer mentioned in the introduction, is really to study the overseas Chinese. So I have two books upcoming, one Chinese migration in Europe, and the other one is Chinese migration to MENA, especially. So that is this trust or distrust relationship at the society level. So throughout all these studies that I have looked at, basically the issue of battle of narratives have always come up, in a corner. It was not always the bigger theme, but it was always there, hinting at me, and we thought that it was nice to make this into a publishable piece. So we published in this book, Asia in the Old and New Cold Wars, Ideologies, Narratives, and Lived Experience. And in there, we contrast more deeper the reactions from MENA states and from Europe. Okay, so I think it's 12:49. So thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. And now it's time for discussion. Thank you.